And I am now. One, two, one, two, three. It doesn't matter because you already clapped. You know how it works. Okay.
We clapped, yeah.
What is up, my Cracker Tugas? It's us, the Elestrals, and we're back once again with a special guest to run you through a tier list of what we think the next format, now that Daybreak is officially out and available for Premier Play, will look like. We've got, as always, of course, the GOAT, MBT, here with us. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, so happy to be here, etc., etc. Wow, we've really got a corner full of casters here today. For those of you who are unfamiliar with me, I run the MBT Elestrals channel. We're trying to overtake the actual Elestrals channel and usurp A Drive so that we can finally run the format. Thank you for having me on. I'm super excited to be talking about decks.
Yeah, very excited to have the third person, I believe, to overrun Wirtz in terms of subscriber count here to talk to us about Daybreak.
Wirtz my goat.
With the new format shaking up, kind of a lot of the stuff that we can play, I found that like Daybreak, more so than Frostfall, has introduced a ton of new decks that are super playable. So I think it is really interesting to talk about like everything new that you can play and all of the old stuff that got a very powerful buff, because I do think that this set really shook up the meta and is going to take some decks that were top tier, make them not so much top tier, other decks that were not top tier, make them a bit more top tier. I think it shakes up enough that it's worth talking about all the decks that we have on the tier list here today.
It's crazy because as we've been sort of like thinking about prepping to make this video, we're just constantly like, I have no idea what's going to be the best deck. So many decks seem not only like cool and fun, which is very important, but also they all just seem like good. There's very few decks on this list I'm like, nah, absolute stinker, would not do well in a tournament at all. Most of them are like, yeah, I could see this getting a top if someone has a nice run. I think anything it could do well in a tournament.
Yeah, so I think the overall metric that we're going to be looking at here, they're the 4 tiers that we have on this list, but the metric, in my opinion, and at least from the discussions we've been having, is that the deck to beat that is kind of like the bar for is your deck good and consistent and top tier is, can the deck beat fives? Fives being basically the deck that plays so low to the ground that like it pretty much is always consistent, will always put up consistent results. So if your deck is able to consistently deal with that deck, it's gonna find itself at the top of our tier list. Otherwise, if your deck is able to contend with it, but not as often, you know, maybe at 50-50 wins or maybe even less than that, it's going to be lower than fives on the tier list. So I think we should just start by putting fives right here at meta contender. I don't think we're putting it at top tier. I think the top tier decks are the ones that can topple fives. So for that reason, I think fives should just start at the meta contender, and then from there we continue with the rest of the decks.
I think that fives is a very interesting position inside of this meta. Like a lot of the decks that I think are, or maybe would be in the top tier, do their strategy like really, really well. They gain advantage very, very well. They can take away advantage very well. And fives is like, yeah, it's like that's that baseline, right? But it's also really funny because it is, in theory, just so much different than what we saw, you know, last format. A lot of the sixes, the crabs, but like the inherent inclusion of things like Dense Fog and Spectaris kind of changes this deck up a little bit to what we saw pre-crabs fives, which again is very interesting. Obviously, this deck's running things like Eddy, which is just a powerhouse in practically every deck. But, you know, the fact that other decks can maybe utilize that card even better, maybe he's up for suspect. But definitely a good baseline. However, just know that this is like, if you want to just pick up a deck, five's not a bad option. But
I'm a big fan of fives. I think it's funny that at present it is playing, I think, exactly 0 cards with a 5 in the attack stat. But I think the deck is really good. Although I do, in that video, kind of forecast that as game plan decks, what I'm calling decks that have, like, a thing to do, become kind of tighter, their lines become more actualized, they decide what direction they want to go in, it will get kind of overwhelmed by the small synergies that make those decks playable in the first place. I still like fives a lot. I think it is going to see a lot of play, especially in the early days of the format. But depending on how the format shakes out, it still might be a playable option because it's very adaptable in ways that a lot of these game plan decks are.
All right, moving on, we have the Earthburn deck, which is the deck that plays Voltuga to search out your eruption. It can play the Vesuvatuga as well, although I do not know if that's the best way to play this deck. How are we feeling about this? Do we feel like it's rogue at all? I feel like burn decks in general are able to steal some wins, but this feels like the less good burn deck in the format. I want to put this at non-competitive. How do we feel about that?
This is a deck I've been labbing since like we had the full set reveal, and I think it probably hovers right in between non-competitive and rogue. It just depends on how high roll you be. I'd probably put it in non-competitive because you need to high roll with it in order for it to do well. The only times that this deck ever looks crazy is like you open Triple Eruption, Drataya, Ambrosia, and then like you draw your entire deck. Like that's the only way that this deck ever feels crazy. Otherwise, you're like, what do I do? Like I do nothing. That is what the deck does most of the time because Boltuga is just such an unimpressive body. And you have to basically rely that you draw well consistently to like see Ash Rabbit at the right point in time where you can start looping Eruption, start looping Ambrosias, that type of thing. It's just it's so middling. I want to do a deck profile on the deck at some point, but I hope to never see this in tournament because it is just not fun to play against. It's not really that fun to play because it's still slow, even with the like high rolliness. It's not great.
All right, moving on, we have Mor Frost, which was a deck that we put in top tier for our Frostfall, our Frostfall tier list.
Can we
and the thing
gas
that was
everyone?
crazy with that is that it didn't end up being top tier. It was a deck that would have been top tier if it didn't cost as much as it does spirit-wise, because I think the cards are just really good. However, Caleb, do you want to tell us where we're putting this for this format? Because this one is hovering a little bit lower than it was last time.
I think this goes all the way down to non-competitive. I think that Bat is not doing enough for the deck. Like,
Pack it up, Snowflake Squad.
the best thing this deck can be doing is opening like some cracked hand where you have like Keon, Lycanform, Golden Apple, and then you have a solid turn one and it still costs you your entire life savings. And it's just like I want it to be good so bad. I wish that we had more discard stuff for Bat. It's such a fun deck. It's so cool, but it costs. The rent is too damn high for all of us Mor Frost gamers.
Not even just that. Beyond all that, the release of
we want to talk about
Dense Fog makes it so that your deck does not function. Like, the entire game plan of this deck is to stick a large bomb, and now with the addition of Pulsar that we got in Daybreak, you no longer have to play the bricks in the form of the Cryoling Cryover. You don't have to play Cryoling Cryover anymore. You just play Pulsar because your Pulsar gets big enough so that it's basically just a Cryover without the bricks. But then your opponent sticks a Specteris on the board, Pulsar doesn't walk over, a bomb doesn't walk over, their Specteris can attack over, you're in this form, you don't get to pop a back row. Like, there is absolutely nothing in Engine in your deck with the exception of exactly Cryoblast that lets you deal with a Specteris, and you were already losing to Battlestep Gorgons. Now they go Battlestep Dense Fog. They got 6 silver bullets that just kill your entire deck. With the addition of those new cards that will most likely be in everyone's main and or side, there just is no world where this deck is competitive at all.
What I like the most about Mor Frost is that it integrates the weaknesses of every other deck. Like, the Nexus decks tend to keep the Divine up, which puts them at a really precarious position versus Lavalith, which this deck does. The all-in on a singular guy decks like Waspy tend to have a real problem with targeted removal like Earthquake, which this deck does. The floating decks like Water Nexus playing Foamy have a real problem with Specteris, which this deck does. It's like your opponent is just going to board in 15 cards versus you.
Next up, we got Fire Nexus, which this deck, I personally believe, goes toe-to-toe with the Fives deck. I think this deck has a lot of tools going for it. The introduction of Ash Rabbit is really insane, and there is also another tool that this deck gets in the form of Argo that lets you put spirits on the board with an artifact that lets you then finally utilize Kindleo to a good degree. In my opinion, I think Fire Nexus has a very good spot at meta contender. What do you guys think about this?
So I'll disagree with you a little bit. I would feel comfortable putting Fire Nexus not in the non-competitive portion, but maybe Rogue bordering on meta contender. I guess I feel comfortable with it here. I think you're right that the game plan of this deck is like pretty solid. Like, Kindleo is a really powerful, largely unexplored card. But I think what you've identified is the cards that make Kindleo good are cards like Argo. And I think that, unfortunately, relying on that particular card to set up plays is kind of a really rough position to be in. In a world where you are able to get a Kindleo on field and perform a Nexus, it's crazy. It's like unthinkably strong. I just think that world is just a little less frequent than it would need to be a meta contender. I want to shout out some specific cards that I think are really cool in this deck. Rummacole is not a bad card. They have
Insane.
they have their own little Jolted. That's so cute. And
If only it was a 5.
yeah, tell me about it. He gets to what, 4? Come on.
Just a 4. Yep. Yeah.
How could
it's
you
so,
do this to
so
me?
sad. It's so sad.
It's a 4/4. It's literally prototype Rummagem, bro.
Like, and the other rough part of Fire Nexus is these other Nexus decks, of course, get to make really frequent use of Altar of Stars. That's almost always on because their Divine Rune is so good, but the Divine Rune for Fire is so bad that it's like, okay, do I want to be playing Hef? Do I want to be playing Hammer to like keep these powerful Nexus tools on? For me, it's like a less competent version of Earth and Water and maybe Frost. We'll get to that, I guess.
Absolutely. Do you guys want to talk about the first top tier deck in the meta, Mill?
Yeah.
The very first top tier deck.
Absolutely.
This is
So-
S
it's
plus
me.
tier.
S tier.
If
It's
the goal
nothing
of the
better.
deck was to be bad, I think this deck is going to go. I personally think this deck goes in rogue rather than non-competitive, specifically because this deck is the type of shit. It's like it's the runic stun of the format. And it's the kind of thing where, is the deck good? No. Can you pull up? And if you have like a good like a good RNG day and you let's go gambling, you know what I mean? You could just mill everyone out all day. That is just like a thing that can happen. I think if you walk into a tournament with Earthburn or Mor Frost, you are never, ever, ever going to win. I think with Mill, you can just high roll enough to get a win, you know? On the opposite end of things, Earth Nexus. This deck is able to consistently go toe-to-toe with 5s and is going to be our first top-tier contender deck here. Josh has shown it at the last webcam tournament. This deck has done well ever since base set, and it continues to get more tools. In Frostfall, it got the Crab, and now in Daybreak, it got Bloom, and it got Mudlet, which are both cards that have actually proven to be very strong. Mudlet specifically allows you, in tandem with Bloom or in tandem with Altar, this is a deck that will now be playing a lot of Altar. You want to be Nexusing a whole lot more because you finally have a good receive Elestral. It lets you blank opponents' battle phases. It lets you play around Tsunami. It lets you play around your opponent's altars. You just have so many tools to disrupt the opponent and counter their disruptions, even in your own battle phase, that this deck has a wide variety of tools on top of the very powerful Equilinks, which, after the ban of Sparkit, has just solidified its spot as the #1 best Nexus Celestial in the game. Maybe kind of going toe-to-toe with potentially like Aphoros, because drawing 2 is good, but I just think clearing back row is just way more valuable in this game.
Yeah. No, like, it's not a shock that the deck that has everything is the deck that can do everything, right? Like, it's like the Earth in the first set, in the second set, it's like you have a bunch of tools, consistency. You can run effectively all mono spirits, right? You don't really have to do a lot of spirit math here. You can tech in whatever cards you want. So it's a very flexible deck on top of that, like Earth Flexus, right? But like the thing is that now you can play Altar. It's the best Altar strategy. It previously was Thunder. And it's like, as Thunder before it was previously maybe the best deck in the room with Earth right behind it, it's, not a shock that's with Sparkit gone that this deck has just the tools to just slam. Mudlet and Bloom are a surprising inclusion, I will say, in terms of the Daybreak meta, because while initially kind of a meme, I'm not gonna lie, like in terms of theory, it's like, oh, if it's good, but like what happens if you just give Earth Eddy? Like, it can play natively. Like, what happens when
Edward.
when you give
Shout out
Earth?
to Edward.
It's crazy. Like,
Edward.
what happens?
unbelievable.
What happens when you give Earth like Altar of Stars 4, 5, 6?
I think you were walking me through a play that you did in the casual tournament with this deck, where like having a Mudlet as a receiver with an Altar setup meant that like you could Viscerus into proccing 3 Viscerus. It was just like shocking what this deck can accomplish with a tool that like innocuous. If I had to identify kind of a weakness of this strategy, outside of how expensive everything is, I think there's a significant amount of understanding in 5s that like the goal of each individual card is to be live and valuable at every individual instance. Whereas like there are cards in Earth Nexus that need a synergy in order to be like good. Like an Altar of Stars isn't good unless you have like the Stadium or the Divine, which you almost always have. But it means like if you have a blowout like a Lavalith that trades for the card that would be altering from, there are like ways where you can find yourself completely fucked in ways that like 5s maybe wouldn't experience. The trade-off for that, of course, is that your cards actually do things instead of just having a number on them.
Next up, we got the Fungai Lock, which is a deck that we have not tested at all, but we wanted to bring Joseph on almost specifically for this because you have tested this deck a significant amount. Let us know what you think about the Fungai Lock deck.
It's not good. I wish it was
Not good.
You could put it in Rogue if you like. The concept.
Fair enough.
The concept of this deck, I think the problem is the dupe lock is not strong. I want it to be good. I want the dupe lock to be really good. But unfortunately, it really doesn't do anything in a format where there's like so available single target removal and everyone's playing it, and doing the setup loses to Laurels, and it's just really rough. That said, I think Fungi may still be playable with Follow the Wisps in a deck maybe like Fire Nexus. There's so many scenarios in which like casting a Fungi and having access to Follow the Wisps is just fog, and that deck in particular would really appreciate getting a turn without a combat step so you can stick a Spirit on board to Nexus onto a Kindleo or something. The Bronto-Wisp is just kind of the icing on the cake. It's a really powerful card, but it is rough.
Big guy.
Yeah, it is kind of rough to have to set up over the course of like 8 or 9 turns. Really cool card. Doesn't require too much investment in the deck, but definitely not sustainable as like your like strategy.
Next up, we got Windburn, the Tox deck. I think that this deck is the superior burn deck if you had to compare this to the Earth burn deck.
Yeah.
But I also don't think that this deck is that crazy. Like, it does have more burn tools that don't just get walled by the fact your opponent has a Fire Spirit on their field. But I think the deck still is lacking and isn't a meta contender in my opinion, just because it is lacking a couple of tools. The Aeolus is really expensive to resolve because 2 spirits to search a guy, to then cast that guy. Even though you're burning your opponent, so you're like kind of evening the playing field there, you're still going on like a 3-for-1 or even sometimes a 3-for-2 trade to pass on an Exalter with 3 attack. So you're not going to be doing a whole lot with that. Do you guys feel like Rogue is the right spot for this or no?
Oh, go ahead. You go ahead. You go first. I got a whole thing.
Yeah. Oh, he's got a thing. All right. Okay. I feel like Windburn is really just like the Wind Toolbox from set 2 plus Toxion, plus Toxiswarm. And it's like, look, Thunder Nexus wasn't good because of the Toxion. It was good because of the stuff around it. And frankly, the Wind Toolbox stuff outside of exactly P-Gust is like, it's okay. There's a reason it hasn't done well. Like Exalter is a 3-2 Nexus to burn. Like, okay, I can burn 4 in a turn between Exalter and Toxiswarm. That's good, but they like get killed by literally anything under the sun. And I feel like that's not as good of a payoff as other decks. You just don't generate enough advantage. And if your game plan is to burn 4 in a turn repeatedly, it loses to Laurel so hard. It loses to Earthquake. It loses to Gorgon's Gaze. It loses to literally any piece of interaction in the game. I don't think this plays around anything except like a P-Gust. No, it loses to P-Gust. It loses everything.
Yeah. So, okay. Here's 2 truths and a lie for you, and I'm apparently the lie here. I actually think that this deck, very worst, is meta contender. But I actually think, and this is my hot take, this deck is actually good, and we will see it do good.
I'm actually right there with you, Mr. Swolax.
Yeah.
I'm 100%
No way.
No, it's this deck like here. So here's the thing about it. Despite the fact that Toxion or Toxiswarm, is one of the only big new tools inside the deck, that's actually pretty huge. Not only can you apply just normal pressure outside of things like Exalter, it also gives the deck an extra like body that is not Sorlet that can actually hit over things or trade value. On top of the fact that you're now also like contending with decks that are like Earth, Fire Nexus, and some other decks that are all on the board, like other spirits on the board. Like, who cares if you're just like doing direct spirit damage each turn, right? And the fact that like your opponent now has to respond to your Exalter and to your Toxiswarm, and it does not feel good. It feels terrible. This is one of the most consistent decks too, with Alos being able to search everything. On top of the fact that you could just run like a version of this that is more aggro burn or toolbox, and I think that both of them are pretty good, actually.
I want to echo all those sentiments. I think Swolex is 100% correct. I would say meta contender at minimum. I also would put this in top tier. I think more than the change in terms of the cards it got, which admittedly is just Toxiswarm, right? It's just the one asshole. Is the change of the meta. As decks like, I mean, we'll get to them, but as decks like Earth Nexus become really powerful, being the altar deck that can trigger P-Gust at instant speed is like insane. There's a significant amount of scenarios where like conceptualizing this deck as a burn deck, I feel like is kind of unfair to it, because you're not trying to do the Thunder Nexus thing where like I am sitting behind 2 Astrabbits and a stadium. I'll just make my Toxion's like 6s and you can never get over them, and I'll burn you for 2 every turn. That never happens in this deck. Instead, you are playing a control game where you're trying to simplify the board state to a point where your opponent doesn't have back row runes. Then you land an Exaltair and win immediately. Even if it's just the Exaltair, you get to burn for 2, Nexus onto the Exaltair. If you've simplified the board state, you then get to hit for like 3.
Yeah, swing
like,
for 2 or 3, yeah.
It's just a control deck that on its last turn will do 7 damage. Which I think is really strong. It's like in a position where it has a game plan, unlike decks like 5s. As 5s start to shave individual Elestrals, it can outpace them in terms of having a guy every turn. And it is the Nexus deck that is specifically poised to destroy Divine Runes as they are cast, which is like a really valuable place to be.
You know, Joseph, I didn't know you were so handsome and so smart as well.
Thanks.
Dude,
I think there are weaknesses to this strategy for sure. Like
Yes,
Toxiswarm being a 4 sucks balls. The fact that you have to like play Aeolia without like a searcher is really rough. Frequently you find yourself in a position where like you have all the answers in your hand, but it takes like 4 turns to develop them, which sucks. But I would not feel comfortable putting this any lower than meta contender. I think this is a good deck.
Caleb, are they changing your mind on this or no?
I hear the argument for meta contender, but I think it's worse than Fire Nexus.
So
I think it's like right around Fire Nexus.
Oh, it's
I'm
definitely a
not sold
better
on
deck
it.
than Fire Nexus. I will.
Here's what I think. Here's what I think, and everyone watching in the comments, you guys can come back to this video in like a month and a half or something and say I told you so to either me or Caleb, or to Swole and Joseph.
True.
My guess here, I legitimately believe that we're gonna put this in meta contender. I'm gonna trust you guys on this, but I think this is the Mor Frost of this tier list. I legitimately think it's going to be one of those where it's like, oh, you put this in meta contender? Congratulations. It never did anything, and it was actually non-competitive the whole time. Hey, Swole.
There go Dave.
What's this deck over here? What does that say? Does that say bears?
Yo, the best deck in Elestrals. Okay, so you know we were talking about the Mor Frost of this tier list being Windburn. This is the Mor Frost, but of the tier list of Frostfall, meaning that it's the best deck in the room, and we're all freaking out about it. And by we, I mean me and Josh. So okay, this and
I
Caleb.
played it at locals last week, and I went 3-1 and lost to a really bad hand.
is just freaking out about it. Okay, so this is the weird part, right? Bears is unironically, and this is again very strange, meta contender or rogue. Like at its worst, this deck is like it still has all the problems that Bears had. The guys are small. I can't get over anything. And like some games, it just be like that. Other games, you are just literally poking the bear every single turn. This is the craziest counter rune I've ever seen. 4/4 to every Ursa Elestral, or to an Ursa Elestral. So typically it's just a battle trick, meaning that this deck gets Mirror Force. This deck gets Sakuretsu Armor. This deck gets like one of the most powerful inclusions and makes it a do not attack me
It's
deck.
just Mirror Force. It's just Mirror Force.
It's wild.
It's Mirror Force.
And the fact that it's effectively then better Viscerous in some cases. The deck changes almost entirely from its previous incarnations. You are playing things like Ursa Cole now to search this card. This card is now searchable turn 1, which is this the first searchable counter rune in Elestral? So for that reason alone, I think that like meta contender is I'm comfortable putting it there. You will see this at tournaments, and it might even put up results that are surprising.
Next up, we got Frost Nexus with the addition of the Brumalinks. Where would you guys rate this in terms of competitiveness?
I think we can put it in Rogue as like an apology. I have high hopes for this deck. It's like there's a lot of cool stuff it has. You know, Windburn is like a Nexus deck that can refill itself with like a Nemesail. Frost Nexus has like Catarant, which is crazy good individual card.
With M Frostex, it's insane. Yeah.
The Frigicub stuff is nice. It can still hit for like 6 or 7, but to me, it just strikes me as a deck that has all the same benefits as playing Windburn. One guy that hits for 1 million. The ability to just sit on receivers in stalled game states with except it loses to everything. Like it has a problem with shield, it has a problem with rune removal, because if you get the Mountains of Boreas off the field, Frigicub sucks ass. It has a problem with Eddy and Mudlet and Tsunami, and it has a problem going to 0 on turn 2. It's just, it's rough. Brummelinx is a cool card also, but he's also bad. Like, it locks a rune in a format where all but one rune is chainable, and it's a 3/5, you know? It's like people are ready to kill Astrabbit. They're ready to kill this guy if it comes down to it.
Speaking of Olympus Town, Race to the Top Thunder. So this is like Thunder Nexus with Race and all that stuff. I don't know where to put this. I'm going to be completely honest with you. Like, with the hit of Spark It, I felt like the deck was still good. I was going to play that for the last Frostfall tourney. Ended up getting pilled on Earth by Josh. But it didn't really get very many new tools with the exception of the Arcolith. But I know, Caleb, you made like a deck profile for a Thunder deck and thought it was pretty nice. So I kind of want to hear your thoughts about this.
The Thunder list that I built was an Argo Thunder list, and it felt really nice, but it struggles the exact same that any Argo list struggles. It's expensive. Arcolith helps so much with that because, like in Fire Nexus, you can just ascend into Arcolith and then recycle 3 spirits, and that feels really good. And be able to do that over an Astrabbit. Yeah, like it feels really nice. But that's the only card in the deck other than Ambrosia that does that, and so it still just feels really expensive.
I'll go to bat for it. I think this could go in top tier. I think this is a like a recognized. I think this is a realistic deck to bring to an event and expect to wallop on 5s all day. I think Race to the Top is still insane. I think this deck has a huge advantage over strategies like Earth Nexus and Frost Nexus and Fire Nexus that are trying to play Stadium Wars because it has such consistent access to Mount Olympus and such
the best stadium too, technically.
Yeah, and such an immediate payoff in that, like, even if, like, a lot of times, you know, you play Feloy and it's there so you can Nexus off it. Mount Olympus is of course there so you can Nexus Office, but you can like get a like removal spell on the way. Maybe it's not top tier at the moment, but I think it's a matter of time until it becomes a top tier deck.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think that same thing can't be said for something like Phosphocell if we want to just like knock out that too, because I think that has all the same problems as as Thunder Nexus. But I know Joseph, you also tested out this deck for a little while. And Anocell is like the worst card of all time, right?
Yeah, it's terrible. Well, so I think there's 2 different Phosphocell decks. There's Thunder Nexus playing 1 bad card in Larvacell, and there's a deck trying to get to Phosphocell, and I think both of those decks are PP bad.
Yeah, I think it's cool that Thunder and other spirit types get more tools as a whole. Like having different deck identities is neat. But Phosphocell is just a little bit weaker than your just generic Thunder stuff. But speaking of 3-drops.
Speak about them. Tell them about the 3-drops.
One that is very hype right now and it stocks super through the roof. Tell me your guys' thoughts on Chronodile.
So Chronodile is a deck that if you're playing in the tournament that is coming up this weekend, or even if you are going to locals, you are more than likely going to see a lot of Chronodile. And the reason why is because for the first time in Elestrals history, we have a starter deck that is very strong, fresh out the box. You buy 1 of this, your deck is strong. You buy 2 of this, your deck is very good, completely able to compete. Obviously, it's going to be missing some tools here and there, but like you basically have a Water Nexus with a boss monster fresh out of the box. It's kind of insane. And the card itself is a big boss monster with protection and removal. Like, what more could you ask for in a boss monster, you know?
Chronodile's crazy. Like, basically, the only way to really consistently out it is to back row removal and then, Elestral removal. But who's playing Thunderstorm? Who's playing Tornado? Like,
Lavalith is the only
It's
out.
just Lavalith. Like, the reality is it's just Lavalith that hard clears this. And looking at our list right now, our tier list, how many of these decks are actually playing Lavalith, even inside? Like, it's like 5s, Bears, Fire Nexus probably, and Fungai Lock, I guess.
Do you guys think this deck beats 5s?
Absolutely.
Depends on the list. It depends on the list.
It's really rough. I think that like this deck beats a lot of what's on the list, but I think fives is almost a uniquely bad matchup just because of how present Lavalith is. Unless you're playing the Caleb Dymax list, in which case I would say it's very
Yes. Yes,
Fair.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That
I
list
think we can.
is
If
fucked up.
nothing else, then because we expect to see a ton of this, I think we can put this in top tier.
I legitimately believe that this is a top tier deck because you will see a ton of this at tournaments, both on the local level and on like the the webcam tourneys and stuff like that. You're gonna be seeing a fuck ton of Chronodile, and we already saw like Water Nexus was like a top performer in the last format. Like it is a good deck, and they finally gave the deck a win condition that isn't looking at the clock, so it's kind of insane.
We'll see a lot of Chronodile. One thing I thought we were going to see a lot of inside of the coming format, because everyone was really hyping it up, gassing this deck forever, was Waspy. Waspy is like a deck that I think a lot of people have been testing with. People were saying this is cracked. I can't believe this deck exists. I don't have a lot of faith in this deck. What about you guys?
I don't have a lot of faith in this deck. I think it
Ass.
I think it is really good before people realize that it's a card that can be played. To me, the good builds of Waspy are like Earth Nexus has one random Elestral slot that I think you, Swole, were testing Mudlet in, is how you came to that conclusion. And like,
Yeah.
what if you put the Waspy in that slot is like kind of the theory. I think that those lists are like the Waspy lists I may be scared of, but I've played a lot against like the dedicated, like I'm going to mull till I get to Spine Nymph, I'm going to make it happen lists, and they really do not inspire confidence. A combination of losing to like EQ on a lot of board states, a combination of losing to like your opponent refuses to attack into Argo on a lot of board states because they're trying to set up like a bag of wins. It's really, really rough.
The card is very outable, despite the fact that it does deal with like the trap cards and whatnot. I think it's the kind of deck that can absolutely steal games in the same way Frost Nexus and the Fungai Lock deck can. It's not a bad deck because, like we said, Earth does have a lot of good tools that you can slot into this deck. But do I think that it's a meta contender? By no means.
Hey, Frostfall flashback, Lockagon.
Speaking of two drops.
What if Chronodile didn't play a win con?
True.
It's
Don't
not
tell
only
peeps,
bad
don't tell peeps.
Chronodile.
Why is this
I feel
on the
like
list?
it's bad Kuribis. Like we could put this in non-competitive
bad
just
Kuribis.
because there is a better build of the deck that exists.
Yeah.
Here, let's talk
Let's
about
talk about,
Kuribis,
let's
shall
talk
we?
about the Kurbussi.
This
Yes,
card,
Kuribussi.
this
It's
is
really
like
good.
I agree. I agree that this card is very good.
This is the
Yeah.
the evolution of Water Nexus that like I think Caleb's absolutely right that like a lot of the time the Chronodile decks are like Water Nexus with a win con, and I think there's an argument as to whether the win con should be Chronodile or Kuribis. The Chronodile decks I think are going to be successful are Turbo and Chronodile, but the Water Nexus decks that I think are going to be successful are going to be playing this card.
Like, this card is overall very good. I think this is a meta contender. Not only do I think it's a meta contender, I think that it's slapped like right next to fives, either like right under it or right over it. I think the
I
deck
would
is,
put
like,
it above
right there
fives,
with it.
honestly.
I would put it above
I
fives too.
think this is a top tier deck. I'm gonna fight all y'all.
Nay.
This
Well,
one.
I
I
Yo.
think that
fucking go
this
for it.
deck
Put it up.
is easily top
True.
tier. I think
God,
Kuribis
yes.
is crazy. You're shit talking Rock and Hard Place. I think that card is insane. I understand that giving your opponent agency is bad, right? But the reality is, and I've been playing a lot of decks that play Rock and Hard between Kuribis, and I'm gonna also kind of hop in and bring Draking, my goat, up in this as well.
Well, we can't talk about these
So I
cards
think
that don't
that
exist
both-
yet.
This is Konami? Oh, never
Explode.
mind. Never mind. We're good. We're good. We're good. We're good. We're good.
We're all in collective agreement this deck's good. There's literally only one man alive that I think that thinks this next deck is good.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and it's
Shout
I'll call
out
it
to
Mike
my
Thomas.
boy,
my world's
Trishula
competitor.
TTV,
my
Mike Thomas. I
goat.
love you so much. You should have won Worlds, buddy, but you're gonna win Elestrals Worlds with Solar Nexus, apparently.
True.
Yeah.
It's true.
How do you feel about Solar Nexus?
So, regardless of Trish Copium, you can't not look at the cards that are available to this strategy and not be like, there's got to be something there. Like,
There is something there. That's the thing.
It's copium, yeah.
I have flipped so hard. It's so over. We're so back so many times in this deck.
Yep.
And I'm back at like I think this deck's actually pretty solid. I think that Lustragon is a really solid payoff for the deck. It can get to it really consistently. And you can play this deck in a way where actually you're not... the issue with Solar is that you burn yourself to play the game pretty much. And you know what? Dratora's actually just a pretty solid card. And
Well,
Lustergon's
so
just
the
kind of
thing-
crazy. Once you cut the fat, you get rid of the Leos. Any of the
cows
Leos
and
are
the
not worth
Celeste
playing.
Leos
The
and the-
cows. Once you get rid of all of that and you cut it down to the best cards in the deck, it's actually kind of nuts.
For my boy, I want to put it meta, but in my heart,
I feel like it has to be in Rogue, bro. I feel
I'm
like it's
saying
like one
meta.
of
We
these.
has to be meta, dude.
I agree. I
feel like-
think this is way better than Wasp Ivy.
I feel like
Yo,
the only
for
reason
sure.
why I want to put it in meta is because like I'm getting gaslit by like the best gaslit of all time.
You know what? I'll take the gaslight. I'll sniff the code.
It's-
Look,
We'll
we
put it
can
right
come back,
here.
like you said, in like a month, and we can
come
see
back
who
when,
was
when
wrong.
Trish wins
Yeah.
every webcam tourney. We can come back and be like, this should have been top tier coder. What the fuck are y'all saying?
Yeah.
We can come back.
Moving from a deck that that Trish is coping on to a deck that the Knots are coping on.
I think this deck is fire, bro.
This deck's so
Rhinosect
crazy.
No, this deck is Frost.
This deck's
It's
so crazy.
it's
Frost.
this no Rhinosect is this deck fucking
Rhinosect.
cooks, bro. This deck's so
It
funny.
has Rhinosect.
You're like you're
Rhinosects, let's
trying.
go.
You are absolutely trying to not break out laughing while trying to pill people on the deck. Come on.
It's so okay.
I can say it with
Joseph,
straight face. I love this
I'll
deck.
say it.
I've played it so many times. It's so good.
Joseph, I'll say it. When you draw Rhinosect, this deck is here. When you don't draw Rhinosect, the deck is here.
well,
Disagree. No, I'm gonna fully disagree with that, because if you
Fair.
are not seeing Rhinosect turn 5, 6, 7, it doesn't matter, because all of the guys in your deck generate advantage for you. And that's why I think that the list that we put up on the channel is really solid. It's because I'll go to bat. Boom Bat is fucking Dryden. If you don't out it, you will get popped again on your next turn. That card is really good. Being able to ascend
Boom Bat
over an
is very
Arrow
good, I
Mare
agree.
is
Yeah.
really good. And almost all of the cards in that deck that aren't artifact becoming guys are guys that generate advantage when you ascend over an Arrow Mare or something like that.
I agree.
Yep. Finally,
Last but not least,
The greatest deck of all time.
the Geist.
did you buy the incorrect starter deck? Damn, that sucks.
Hey,
well,
wait a
no,
minute.
no. You got your
Farragut's
Spectaris.
cooks.
You got your Dense Fog. You know, that's
True.
We-
You're so
got some
right.
good
We can
counter
put
runes.
this in non-competitive, right?
The thing that's really funny is a lot of people have been saying that this deck is like a slow control deck. You just sit on the Farrageist, whatever. I think this deck is meant to be played
an
hella
aggro deck.
aggro.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
you
not
play it aggro because you put your opponent on a clock, and they're also on a clock due to the effect of Farrageist. It just feels like actually turboing Farrageist itself feels harder than turboing Celestleo. So, like,
Yeah.
the payoff just isn't there, you know? The only good payoff is that it doesn't lose to shield, I guess.
It's a deck that's like a weird time bomb.
Set 4 gonna be crazy.
To 4, yeah. Like set 4, or even let's say October 1st at the earliest. You know, we did get Shattered Stars stuff out. We know that we have, you know, more lunar inside of the card pool, which is great. Right now, non-competitive Rogue if you really want to push it, I guess. But like, I'll be watching. I'll be watching.
All right.
Well,
Also-
I think at the end of the day, we have our tier list, and I think that this is like a pretty solid one. I think that we have a very good grasp on where, at the very least, this first tournament we're getting this weekend is going to shape up to look like. I'm willing to be pleasantly surprised by some of the decks that we have in the meta contender if people choose to bring them. But I think overall, this is more than likely what we will be seeing for the upcoming format.
Yeah, this looks about right. Looks kind of terrifying. A lot of good decks at the top, but a ton of decks right below it. So good luck
Yeah.
on your testing, everyone.
Hell yeah. Any final words?
Bear's best deck, baby.
Subscribe to Words.
If it's
Remember?
true,
True.
if you are interested in picking up any cards for yourself from Daybreak to be able to build some of the decks that we have here, make sure to check out our affiliate link in the description to help support the channel, and we appreciate it a lot.
Mhm.
Is Joseph trying to get his affiliate link?
Oh, well, since you mentioned it, you know, I do also have
If you guys like MBT, this person that we've invited on the stream, make sure that you check out Will of the Council on anywhere you get podcasts.
Yeah.
Check out a non-card game related thing.
Yeah, on anywhere you can find podcasts. With that being said, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.
Peace out, my Nimbugs.